Your ex-wife just gave birth to twins, and she listed you as the father. The sentence hit Ethan Cole harder than any boardroom betrayal ever had. Not because the voice on the other end sounded emotional, but because it didn't. It was calm, professional, almost careful, like the woman speaking already understood that one sentence was enough to change a man's entire life. Ethan stood at the far end of a 42nd floor conference room overlooking Midtown Manhattan, one hand pressed against the polished glass table, while 12 executives waited for him to continue discussing a merger worth nearly $3 billion. A digital presentation still glowed behind him, numbers and projections frozen mid-slide, but suddenly none of it seemed important anymore. I think you have the wrong number, Ethan said quietly, his voice controlled in the same way it always was during negotiations, but his grip tightened around the phone just slightly. Mr. Ethan Cole? The woman asked again. This is St. Mary's Medical Center. Sophia Bennett named you as the father of her newborn twins. Twins. For a moment, the entire room around him seemed to lose sound. 6 months earlier, Ethan had finalized his divorce from Sophia in a private law office downtown. Clean paperwork. No drama. No final fight. Just signatures, silence, and 2 people pretending the end of 8 years together didn't hurt as much as it actually did. He remembered the way Sophia refused to look at him after signing the documents. At the time, he thought it was anger. Now he wasn't so sure. Sir, the woman prompted gently. Ethan forced himself back into the moment. There has to be some mistake. I don't believe there is. Her tone softened slightly. One of the babies is experiencing respiratory complications. Ms. Bennett requested your name specifically before being taken into recovery. Ethan's chest tightened unexpectedly. One of the babies? The boy, she answered quietly. The next few hours are very important. Across the conference room, his CFO shifted uncomfortably while the others pretended not to listen. Ethan realized he had gone completely still. He ended billion-dollar negotiations without blinking. He handled corporate attacks, lawsuits, media scandals, and hostile takeovers like routine inconveniences. But this felt different. Personal in a way he couldn't control. I'm on my way, he heard himself say before the logical part of his brain could stop him. The call ended. Silence swallowed the room. Ethan stared at the dark reflection of himself in the conference room window, barely recognizing the expression staring back. One of the executives finally cleared his throat carefully. Mr. Cole, should we continue? Ethan grabbed his suit jacket from the chair without answering immediately. His thoughts moved fast now, searching backward through months he thought were already buried. Sophia had disappeared almost immediately after the divorce. No social media, no public appearances, no mutual friends mentioning her name. At first, he assumed she wanted distance. Maybe she did. But pregnancy? Twins? How had he missed something that massive? Cancel the meeting, Ethan said flatly. Reschedule everything for tomorrow. Everything, his assistant asked carefully from the doorway. Ethan looked toward her, his expression colder now, sharper. Everything. No one argued. They watched him leave the conference room with the kind of silence usually reserved for funerals and market crashes. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Manhattan glowed outside the glass walls in streaks of gold and steel as rush-hour traffic thickened below. Ethan loosened his tie slightly, but the pressure in his chest refused to ease. Sophia pregnant. Sophia alone. Sophia in a hospital bed asking for him. None of it made sense. His phone buzzed again just as the elevator doors opened into the private underground garage. Unknown number. He answered immediately. Mr. Cole. It was the same nurse, but this time her voice sounded tighter somehow. More urgent. What happened? Ethan asked instantly. A brief pause followed. Then came the words that made him break into motion for the first time that day. Sir, your son just stopped breathing for 12 seconds. By the time Ethan Cole's black Escalade pulled into the emergency entrance at St. Mary's Medical Center, rain had already started falling across Manhattan in cold silver streaks, turning the pavement slick beneath the glowing hospital lights. Ethan stepped out before the driver could open the door, moving faster than anyone had ever seen him move during a business crisis. Nurses rushed through the lobby with clipboards and coffee cups while monitors beeped somewhere deeper inside the building. But Ethan barely noticed any of it. His mind stayed locked on one sentence. Your son just stopped breathing for 12 seconds. At the reception desk, a young nurse looked up automatically, ready to ask him to sign in, but the moment she recognized him, her expression changed. "Mr. Cole." Ethan nodded once. "The twins." The nurse immediately stood. "This way." She led him quickly through a maze of white hallways and security doors until they reached the neonatal intensive care unit. The atmosphere shifted the second the glass doors opened. Everything here felt quieter, heavier somehow, like even normal conversation had to whisper around fragile lives. Tiny monitors blinked softly beside incubators while exhausted parents sat motionless in chairs clutching coffee cups they had forgotten to drink. Ethan slowed without meaning to. Then he saw them. 2 incubators side by side beneath dim blue lighting. 1 pink identification card. 1 blue. Lily Bennett. Noah Bennett. His chest tightened unexpectedly. They were so small. Smaller than anything he had imagined. Noah lay connected to a thin oxygen line, while tiny sensors monitored every movement his body made. Lily slept quietly beside him, one hand curled near her face as if the world outside did not exist yet. Ethan stared through the glass, unable to move for a moment. They were born 7 weeks early, a doctor explained beside him. Ethan had not even noticed him approach. "Your son experienced temporary respiratory distress about 15 minutes ago, but he stabilized quickly." Ethan finally looked up. "Will he survive?" The doctor hesitated just enough to tell the truth, without saying it directly. "We are doing everything possible." Ethan exhaled slowly, but the pressure inside him only grew worse. "Can I see Sophia?" "She is awake now," the doctor answered carefully. "But she is exhausted." Ethan barely heard the last part before walking toward the recovery wing. Every step down the hallway felt stranger than the last because none of this belonged in his life. He understood boardrooms, contracts, negotiations. Not this. Not incubators and heart monitors and newborn twins carrying his last name without him even knowing they existed. Outside room 214, he stopped briefly. The door stood partially open. Inside, Sophia Bennett lay against white hospital sheets, pale beneath the low lighting, dark hair pulled loosely over one shoulder. She looked thinner than he remembered, tired in a way that reached beyond exhaustion. But the moment she turned and saw him standing there, something in her expression hardened immediately. Not surprise, not relief, guarded distance. "You came," she said quietly. Ethan stepped inside slowly. "You called me." Sophia gave a faint nod before looking away toward the rain-covered window. Silence stretched between them for several seconds, heavy with 6 months of things neither of them had ever said out loud. Ethan finally broke it. "Twins." Sophia closed her eyes briefly. "I was going to tell you eventually." "Eventually?" The word escaped sharper than he intended. "Sophia, I just found out I have children because a hospital called me while I was in a merger meeting." "I know." Her voice stayed calm, but exhaustion pulled at every word. "I did not plan for this to happen here." Ethan stared at her, trying to understand how the woman he spent 8 years loving had hidden something this enormous. "Why?" he asked quietly. Sophia did not answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the doorway leading back to the neonatal unit. "Did you see them?" Ethan nodded once. Something shifted behind her eyes then. Softer, more vulnerable. "Noah almost died after delivery," she whispered. "For a minute, I thought neither of them would make it." Ethan swallowed hard. The image of those tiny incubators flashed through his mind again. "You should have told me." Sophia finally looked directly at him. "Would you have believed me?" The question hit harder than he expected because, deep down, he already knew the answer would not have been simple 6 months ago. Before Ethan could respond, alarms suddenly echoed from the NICU hallway outside. Fast footsteps followed. A nurse rushed past the room toward the twins section while another voice called urgently for respiratory support. Ethan's entire body turned toward the hallway instantly. Then he heard one sentence that made the blood drain from his face. "The baby boy is crashing again." Ethan was already moving before the nurse finished speaking. The moment the words "baby boy is crashing again" echoed through the hallway, something instinctive took over inside him, faster than logic, stronger than anger, stronger even than shock. He reached the NICU doors just as 2 respiratory specialists rushed inside, carrying equipment. Through the glass walls, he could see Noah's tiny body surrounded by movement. Machines beeped rapidly, while nurses adjusted monitors and oxygen levels with controlled urgency. One doctor leaned over the incubator speaking calmly to the team, while another checked the infant's breathing tube. Ethan stopped just outside the doors, every muscle in his body locked tight. "What is happening?" he demanded the second a nurse stepped out. "His lungs are underdeveloped," she explained quickly. "This can happen with premature births. We are stabilizing him now." "Stabilizing?" Ethan repeated sharply. "You told me he was stable 10 minutes ago." The nurse held her composure professionally, but he could see the strain in her eyes. "Sir, neonatal cases can change very quickly." Ethan looked back through the glass again. Noah's tiny chest rose unevenly beneath the soft hospital blanket, while Lily slept quietly in the incubator beside him, completely unaware of the panic unfolding inches away. The contrast hit Ethan harder than he expected. One child sleeping peacefully, one fighting to breathe. His children. The realization still felt unreal. A doctor finally stepped out of the unit and removed his mask. "Mr. Cole." Ethan nodded immediately. "Talk to me." "We were able to stabilize his oxygen levels again," the doctor said carefully. "But we would like to move both twins to a higher-level neonatal care floor downtown as a precaution." Ethan frowned instantly. "Then why are they still here?" The doctor hesitated. "The transport authorization process." "No," Ethan interrupted coldly. "Do not explain paperwork to me while my son is struggling to breathe." The hallway went silent. Even Sophia, standing weakly near the wall in her hospital robe after quietly following him out of recovery, looked stunned by the sharpness in his voice. Ethan pulled out his phone immediately. "Get me the director of pediatric medicine at Westbridge Memorial." He ordered his assistant the second she answered. "Now." "Mr. Cole, it is almost midnight," she replied carefully. "I do not care what time it is." His eyes never left Noah's incubator. "Prepare a private neonatal transport team and clear an entire floor if necessary." The doctor blinked. "Sir, that is not usually." "I did not ask what is usual." Ethan's tone stayed calm, which somehow made it more intimidating. "I asked how fast you can move." 20 minutes later, the entire atmosphere inside the NICU had changed. Additional specialists arrived. New equipment rolled through the hallways. Hospital administrators appeared speaking in hushed voices, while security guards quietly took positions near the elevators. Ethan stood near the glass watching every movement with relentless focus, his expensive suit jacket abandoned over a chair somewhere behind him. Sophia approached slowly, arms folded tightly against herself. "You did not have to do all this," she said softly. Ethan finally looked at her. "Yes," he answered immediately. "I did." For a second, neither of them spoke. Rain continued tapping against the windows while distant thunder rolled over the city outside. Sophia looked exhausted enough to collapse, but there was something else in her expression now too. Confusion, maybe even disbelief. "You really did not know?" she whispered quietly. Ethan stared at her. "Know what?" "How badly you would care once you saw them." The words landed somewhere deep inside him before he could stop them. Ethan glanced back toward the twins. Noah's oxygen levels had finally stabilized enough for the alarms to stop. Screaming, Lily shifted slightly in her sleep, tiny fingers curling near her face. They looked impossibly small inside all those machines and wires. Vulnerable in a way Ethan had never allowed himself to be. His phone buzzed again. "The transfer team is 5 minutes away," his assistant informed him. "Also, there is something else." Ethan's expression sharpened immediately. "What?" A brief pause followed. Hospital security reported an unauthorized attempt to access the twins' medical records approximately 40 minutes ago. Ethan went completely still. "Who tried?" "They do not know yet." The request was blocked before identity verification completed. Slowly, Ethan turned his head toward the NICU glass again. Someone had already been looking for his children before he even arrived. And suddenly, for the first time that night, the situation stopped feeling like a family emergency and started feeling like something far more dangerous. The private neonatal transport team arrived just after midnight wearing dark blue jackets marked Westbridge Memorial, moving through the hospital with the kind of efficiency that came from handling critical cases every day. Portable incubators rolled down the hallway beside advanced respiratory equipment, while administrators whispered nervously near the nurses' station. Ethan stood beside the NICU doors watching every detail with sharp attention, no longer thinking like a businessman stepping into an unexpected family crisis. Now he was watching patterns, timing, reactions. The attempted access to the twins' records refused to leave his mind. Sophia sat quietly nearby in a wheelchair a nurse insisted she use after nearly collapsing from exhaustion. She looked pale beneath the fluorescent lights, one hand gripping the blanket over her lap, while her eyes stayed fixed on Noah's incubator through the glass. Ethan walked toward her slowly. "Who knew you were here?" Sophia looked up immediately. "What?" "The twins," Ethan clarified. "Who knew you came to this hospital?" A flicker of tension crossed her face before she answered. "Almost nobody." "That is not an answer." Sophia exhaled softly. "My doctor. One friend from Seattle." "That is it." Ethan studied her carefully. "Then why would someone try to access their records tonight?" She looked away instantly. That alone told him enough. "Sophia." Her fingers tightened around the blanket. "I told you before," she whispered. "Things got complicated after the divorce." "Complicated how?" She stayed silent for several seconds while nurses carefully prepared Noah for transfer into the transport incubator. Tiny monitors blinked steadily now, but every beep still made Ethan's chest tighten. Finally, Sophia spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "About 2 months after I found out I was pregnant, someone started following me." Ethan's entire expression changed. "Following you?" She nodded faintly. "At first I thought I was imagining it. Same car outside my apartment twice in 1 week. People asking questions about me at work. Strange calls with nobody speaking." Ethan felt cold anger settle into his chest. "And you never told me any of this?" Sophia laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You had already made it very clear you wanted a clean ending, Ethan. That does not mean you disappear while pregnant with my children." The words came out harder than he intended. Sophia met his eyes directly. "Would you have believed me if I showed up at your office saying I was pregnant 2 weeks after signing divorce papers?" Ethan did not answer. Because deep down, the truth was complicated. Back then, their marriage had ended beneath months of distance, mistrust, and exhaustion. He had convinced himself separating was the logical decision. Easier, cleaner. But standing here now, watching their newborn twins surrounded by machines, that logic suddenly felt empty. A nurse approached carefully. "We are ready to move Noah now." Ethan stepped aside immediately as the transport team disconnected monitors with practiced precision. Noah's tiny body looked even smaller inside the portable incubator beneath the soft blue lighting. Beside him, Lily remained asleep, peaceful despite the chaos surrounding her. Sophia's eyes filled slightly as the incubator began moving toward the elevators. "He hates loud noises," she whispered instinctively. Ethan glanced at her. "You already know that?" A faint, exhausted smile appeared for the first time all night. "I carried him for 7 months. I know both of them already." Something inside Ethan shifted painfully at those words. She had lived entire months connected to these children while he knew absolutely nothing. Their kicks, their heartbeats, their names. He missed all of it. Suddenly, one of the security guards near the elevators pressed his hand against an earpiece. His posture changed instantly. "Sir," he said toward Ethan, "we may have a problem." Ethan turned sharply. "What kind of problem?" "One of the hallway cameras outside the NICU lost signal approximately 3 minutes ago." The guard's voice stayed calm, but his eyes remained alert. "Maintenance says it was not a system failure." Ethan's attention snapped toward the dark hallway intersection leading toward the stairwell. For a split second, he thought he saw movement there. Someone turning the corner too quickly. Gone before he could focus clearly. "Lock down this entire floor," Ethan ordered immediately. "Nobody in or out without clearance." The guard nodded and moved fast. Nearby, the elevator doors opened for the transport team. Noah's incubator rolled forward first. Lily followed seconds later. Sophia watched nervously while Ethan stepped beside the twins without hesitation. Then his phone buzzed again. A text from his head of security appeared across the screen. "We identified the unauthorized record request." Ethan opened the message instantly. The next line made his blood run cold. Access request came from someone using internal credentials inside Wolf Industries. Ethan stared at the message on his phone while the elevator doors slid shut around the neonatal transport team. For a moment, the only sound inside the elevator was the quiet hum of machinery surrounding the twins and the soft breathing of exhausted nurses after a tense night. Internal credentials inside Wolf Industries. Ethan read the sentence twice, his jaw tightening slightly. Across from him, Sophia noticed the change in his expression immediately. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Ethan locked his phone without answering right away. His instincts had already shifted into another mode entirely. This was no longer random. Someone connected to his company had been searching for his children before he even knew they existed. Ethan. Sophia's voice sharpened slightly. Tell me. He finally looked at her. Somebody from inside Wolf Industries tried to access the twins' hospital records tonight. The color drained from her face instantly. No, whoever has been following you may already know about them. Sophia gripped the armrests of the wheelchair harder. That cannot happen. Ethan crouched slightly in front of her, lowering his voice. Then tell me what you are not saying. For several seconds, she looked like she might finally explain everything. But before she could answer, the elevator doors opened onto the private neonatal intensive care floor at Westbridge Memorial. The contrast between the two hospitals was immediate. This floor was quieter, more secure, designed for high-profile patients and critical pediatric care. Frosted glass walls separated each neonatal suite, while discreet security officers stood near every entrance. Noah and Lily were moved carefully into a larger private treatment room, where specialized neonatal staff immediately began reconnecting monitors and oxygen systems. Ethan stayed close beside the incubators the entire time, watching every movement with relentless focus. Noah stirred weakly beneath the blanket as a respiratory therapist adjusted his oxygen support. The tiny movement alone hit Ethan harder than he expected. His son was fighting. Sophia watched from the doorway, exhaustion written across her face. A nurse approached her gently. Ms. Bennett, we prepared a recovery suite for you down the hall. Sophia shook her head immediately. I am staying here. You need rest, the nurse insisted carefully. You lost a significant amount of energy during delivery. I said I am staying. Ethan glanced toward her. Even exhausted and pale, Sophia still had the same stubborn determination he remembered from their marriage. It was one of the first things he ever admired about her. The nurse finally nodded and stepped away. Ethan's phone buzzed again almost instantly. His head of security this time. Talk. Ethan answered quietly while stepping toward the hallway. We traced the internal login, the man explained. The credentials belonged to a mid-level analyst in corporate operations. Ethan frowned. Belong. The employee claims his system was remotely accessed approximately 1 hour ago. Ethan's eyes narrowed immediately. Can you verify that? Cybersecurity is checking now. But there is something else you need to know. Ethan leaned against the hallway window, overlooking the rain-covered city below. What? The analyst reports receiving a large wire transfer earlier this week from a private account connected to Langford Capital. Ethan went completely still. Victor Langford. The name alone carried years of history. Publicly, Victor was one of the largest investors connected to Wolf Industries. Privately, he had spent years trying to weaken Ethan's control over the company board. Aggressive, patient, calculating. But this crossed into something personal. Keep digging, Ethan said coldly, and locked down every internal file connected to Sophia Bennett. Already done. Ethan ended the call slowly. His reflection stared back at him through the dark hallway glass, sharper now, colder. Someone had been watching Sophia during her pregnancy. Someone connected to Victor Langford now appeared tied to the twins' medical records. None of this was coincidence anymore. Suddenly, a loud alarm sounded behind him. Ethan spun around instantly. Inside the neonatal suite, one of the monitors attached to Noah flashed yellow while nurses moved quickly toward the incubator. Sophia stood up too fast from her chair, nearly losing balance before grabbing the wall. What happened? She asked breathlessly. A nurse checked the monitor quickly. His oxygen dipped again for a moment, but he is recovering. Ethan stepped back inside immediately, his attention locked on Noah's tiny face beneath the soft lighting. The infant's small hand moved weakly near the blanket. Instinctively, Ethan reached through the incubator opening and gently touched his son's fingers for the first time. Noah's tiny hand curled around one of Ethan's fingers almost. Immediately, the reaction was small, barely noticeable to anyone else in the room, but it hit Ethan like a shockwave. Sophia saw it too. For the first time all night, the tension in her expression cracked slightly. Then one of the security officers near the suite entrance pressed his hand to an earpiece and looked toward Ethan with sudden urgency. Sir, he said carefully, a woman wearing hospital scrubs just tried accessing this floor using a stolen employee badge. Ethan's entire body went rigid. Where is she now? The guard hesitated briefly. She disappeared before security reached the elevators. The security alert changed the atmosphere on the neonatal floor instantly. Two guards moved toward the elevator corridor, while another quietly locked the main access doors leading into the private unit. Nurses continued working around the twins with calm professionalism, but Ethan noticed the subtle tension spreading across the room. Everybody understood something was wrong now. Sophia lowered herself slowly back into the chair beside Lily's incubator, her face pale beneath the soft hospital lighting. "I told you this would happen," she whispered. Ethan turned toward her sharply. "Then stop talking like this started tonight." Sophia looked down at Noah sleeping beneath the oxygen support. Because it did not. The answer settled heavily between them. Ethan walked closer. "How long?" She hesitated before speaking. "About 4 months." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "For months, and you handled this alone?" "I did not know who I could trust anymore." Her voice cracked slightly from exhaustion. "Every time I thought things were calming down, something else happened." Ethan folded his arms tightly. "Such as?" Sophia swallowed hard before answering. "Somebody broke into my apartment in Seattle while I was at work." Ethan's expression darkened immediately. "Why was that not reported to me?" Sophia looked up at him tiredly. "Because we were divorced, Ethan." The words landed harder than either of them expected. Silence stretched for several seconds while the steady beeping of Noah's monitor filled the room. Ethan glanced toward his son again. Tiny chest rising. Slowly beneath the blanket. Fragile. Vulnerable. Completely dependent on the people around him. And somehow Sophia had protected both twins alone for months while he remained completely unaware. "What did they take?" Ethan asked quietly. Sophia shook her head. "Nothing obvious." "Then why do you think it was connected?" She laughed softly without humor. "Because they opened the nursery." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. "They knew about the babies." Sophia nodded faintly. "That was when I realized hiding was probably the only thing keeping them safe." Ethan looked away toward the dark city skyline outside the hospital windows. Rain still covered the glass in silver streaks, while distant traffic lights glowed below Manhattan like blurred red stars. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar pressing beneath his usual control. Guilt. Deep and sharp. Because no matter how complicated the divorce had been, Sophia should never have faced this alone. Noah stirred weakly inside the incubator again. Instantly, both Ethan and Sophia looked toward him at the exact same time. The synchronized reaction caught both of them off guard. One of the nurses smiled softly while adjusting the infant's blanket. "He is responding better now," she said quietly. "Sometimes babies calm down when they recognize familiar voices nearby." Ethan frowned slightly. "He can recognize voices already?" "More than most people realize," the nurse answered gently. Sophia stood slowly despite obvious exhaustion and stepped beside Noah's incubator. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered softly through the opening. "You scared everybody tonight." Noah's tiny fingers moved weakly beneath the blanket at the sound of her voice. Ethan watched the interaction carefully, something inside him tightening painfully again. Sophia already knew how to speak to them, how to comfort them, how to calm them down. She was already a mother, while he still felt like someone trying to catch up to a life that had started without him. The nurse glanced toward Ethan. "Would you like to try skin contact once his breathing stabilizes more?" Ethan looked confused. "What does that mean?" "Holding him against your chest can help regulate his heartbeat and breathing." Ethan stared at Noah silently for a moment. The idea terrified him more than any corporate negotiation ever had. Noah looked impossibly small beneath all the tubes and monitors. "I could hurt him." "You will not," Sophia said quietly beside him. Ethan looked at her. Her expression had softened slightly for the first time since he arrived at the hospital. "You already calm him down without realizing it." Before Ethan could answer, one of the security guards returned quickly through the hallway doors. His expression was tense. "Sir, we reviewed the elevator footage." Ethan straightened immediately. "And?" The woman who attempted access never left the building. The room went silent again. "Where is she now?" Ethan asked coldly. The guard hesitated briefly before answering. "We think she may still be somewhere inside the pediatric wing." Almost immediately, another alarm sounded down the hallway. Not from the twins' room this time. From the emergency stairwell entrance near the neonatal suites. Ethan turned toward the noise instantly, just as one of the nurses suddenly froze beside the incubators. "Wait," she said sharply while checking Lily's chart. Where is baby Bennett's identification bracelet? The room exploded into motion the second the nurse realized Lily's identification bracelet was missing. Another nurse immediately checked the incubator twice, while security officers moved toward the hallway outside the neonatal suite. Sophia's face went completely white. "What do you mean missing?" she asked breathlessly. The nurse kept her voice calm, but urgency tightened every word. "It should be attached to her ankle at all times." Ethan stepped closer to the incubator instantly. Lily remained asleep beneath the soft blanket, completely unaware of the panic spreading around her. Ethan checked the infant carefully himself before looking back at the nurse. Could it have fallen off accidentally? The nurse hesitated. These bracelets are designed not to detach easily. Sophia grabbed the side of the incubator to steady herself. Somebody touched her. Ethan turned toward the security guards. "Lock every elevator and stairwell on this floor now." One of the guards nodded immediately and spoke into his radio, while another began checking nearby patient rooms. Across the hallway, alarms near the stairwell entrance continued flashing red. Ethan's phone buzzed almost simultaneously. Another message from his cybersecurity director. "We found direct communication between the stolen Wolf Industries login and a private server registered under Langford Holdings." Ethan read the message once before slowly lifting his eyes toward the dark hallway outside the suite. Victor Langford was no longer a suspicion. He was connected. Somehow. Sophia noticed Ethan's expression immediately. "What is it?" Ethan showed her the message silently. The moment she read Victor's name, her breathing visibly changed. "Oh my God." Ethan looked sharply at her. "You know something?" Sophia shook her head too quickly. "No, Sophia." His voice lowered dangerously. "Stop protecting people who are putting our children at risk." Her eyes filled instantly, exhaustion and fear finally cracking through the walls she had been holding up all night. "Victor approached me after the divorce," she admitted quietly. Ethan froze. "What?" "About 3 weeks later." Sophia looked down at Lily sleeping inside the incubator. "He invited me to lunch pretending he was concerned about how I was handling everything." Ethan felt anger rising fast now. "And at first it seemed harmless." Her voice trembled slightly. "Then he started asking strange questions about you. Your health. Your future plans. Whether we were really finished." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "Why did you not tell me this?" Sophia laughed weakly through tears. "Because at the time I thought he was just another rich investor obsessed with your company." Ethan ran one hand across his jaw slowly, thoughts moving faster now. Victor had spent years trying to pressure the Wolf Industries board into reducing Ethan's voting control. Publicly, he always smiled beside Ethan at charity events and shareholder meetings. Privately, he waited for weaknesses, cracks, leverage. "When did he find out about the pregnancy?" Ethan asked quietly. Sophia hesitated again. That alone answered part of the question. "Sophia, I do not know for sure," she whispered. "But after my apartment was broken into, I started seeing the same man near my office building repeatedly. About 50 years old. Gray coat. Always pretending to read a newspaper." Ethan's eyes hardened instantly. "You were being watched." "I know that now." Before Ethan could say another word, one of the security guards returned quickly carrying a small plastic evidence bag. Inside it sat Lily's missing hospital bracelet. Sophia gasped softly. "Where did you find that?" "Near the emergency stairwell," the guard answered grimly. Ethan's expression darkened immediately. "Someone removed it on purpose." The guard nodded once. "We also found this." He handed Ethan a folded piece of white paper discovered beside the bracelet. Ethan opened it slowly. Only one sentence appeared in clean black lettering. "Some things are too valuable to keep hidden forever." Sophia covered her mouth instantly. Ethan felt something cold move through his chest. This was not random intimidation anymore. Somebody wanted them afraid. Somebody wanted them to know they were being watched. Noah suddenly stirred inside his incubator again. Soft, distressed sounds escaping him beneath the oxygen support. Instantly, Sophia moved toward him despite her exhaustion. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered gently. "Mama is here." Ethan watched her place one trembling hand against the incubator opening while Noah's movements slowly calmed. The sight hit him unexpectedly hard. She had protected these children alone for months while being followed, threatened, and terrified. And he had been sitting in boardrooms believing his life was under control. One of the nurses approached carefully. "Mr. Cole, there is someone downstairs insisting on speaking with you personally." Ethan barely looked away from the twins. Who? The nurse hesitated uneasily before answering. Victor Langford. The moment Victor Langford's name left the nurse's mouth, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Ethan stood perfectly still beside Noah's incubator, while Sophia's expression shifted instantly from fear to disbelief. He is here, she whispered. The nurse nodded nervously. He said it was urgent. Ethan folded the threatening note slowly and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Every instinct he had developed over years of corporate warfare now screamed the same thing. Victor wanted to be seen. That meant whatever game he was playing had already moved into a new stage. Sophia grabbed Ethan's wrist before he could leave the suite. Do not go down there alone. Ethan looked at her. You think I am afraid of Victor Langford? No, she answered quietly. I think you still do not understand how dangerous this really is. Ethan held her gaze for a moment before glancing back toward the twins. Noah's oxygen monitor finally showed steadier numbers while Lily remained asleep beside him, tiny fingers curled beneath her blanket. For the first time all night, both babies looked calm. Ethan made a decision immediately. Nobody enters this suite without my approval, he told the security guards near the door. Not doctors. Not administrators. Nobody. The guards nodded without hesitation. Ethan turned back toward Sophia one last time. Stay with them. Then he walked out into the hallway. The elevator ride downstairs felt strangely quiet compared to the chaos inside his head. Victor Langford had spent years trying to pressure him professionally, but showing up at a neonatal intensive care unit in the middle of the night crossed every boundary Ethan believed still existed between business and personal life. When the elevator doors opened into the private lobby, Victor was already waiting near the windows overlooking the rain-soaked Manhattan streets below. Perfect gray suit, silver tie, calm posture. At 62 years old, Victor still carried the polished confidence of a man who believed every room eventually belonged to him. He smiled faintly when Ethan approached. Long night. Ethan stopped several feet away. You have exactly 30 seconds before I have security remove you from this building. Victor's smile barely changed. You always did become emotional when things got personal. Ethan's expression hardened immediately. You followed Sophia during her pregnancy. I monitored a potential corporate vulnerability, Victor corrected calmly. There is a difference. Ethan took one slow step forward. You threaten my children. No, Victor shook his head lightly. If I wanted to threaten your children, you would not be standing here having a conversation. The cold certainty in his tone made Ethan's jaw tighten. Victor glanced toward the elevators leading upstairs. Twins, he said softly. That changes things considerably. Ethan fought the urge to hit him with every ounce of control he had left. Why are you here? Victor's expression shifted slightly then, becoming more serious. Because somebody else is involved now. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? Victor exhaled slowly before answering. You think this started with me because it is easier than seeing the larger picture. Ethan stared at him silently. The first person who discovered Sophia's pregnancy was not connected to my company. Victor's voice lowered carefully. It was connected to your board. Ethan felt his stomach tighten instantly. Impossible. Is it? Victor reached into his coat and handed Ethan a folded document. Read the names. Ethan opened the paper slowly. Inside was a list of private communications between multiple Wolf Industries board members discussing succession concerns, investor instability, and potential leadership restructuring if Ethan became distracted by a public family scandal. One sentence near the bottom stood out immediately. If the children are confirmed, control of the company may become negotiable. Ethan looked up sharply. Where did you get this? From someone who realized things were moving too far. Victor's expression darkened slightly for the first time. You are not the only powerful man with enemies, Ethan. Silence settled heavily between them while rain streaked the lobby windows behind Victor. Ethan's thoughts moved rapidly now. This was bigger than leverage. Bigger than a hostile takeover attempt. People inside his own board had viewed unborn children as strategic pressure points. You still have not explained why you followed Sophia, Ethan said coldly. Victor met his eyes directly. Because after your divorce, several investors believed your personal life made you vulnerable for the first time in years. Ethan's voice lowered dangerously. And you agreed with them. Victor gave a faint smile. Until tonight. Ethan frowned slightly. What changed? Victor glanced toward the elevators again. I watched you move an entire neonatal department across Manhattan in under an hour. His expression sharpened carefully. Men willing to destroy themselves for family become unpredictable. That makes you harder to control, not easier. Before Ethan could respond, his phone suddenly rang. One of the security guards upstairs. Ethan answered immediately. What happened? The guard's breathing sounded strained. Sir, Ms. Bennett is gone. Ethan was already moving before the call ended. The moment the security guard said Sophia was gone, he turned away from Victor Langford without another word and headed straight for the elevators, every instinct inside him narrowing into one brutal certainty. Somebody had reached her. The private elevator climbed painfully slow toward the neonatal floor, while Ethan's thoughts raced faster than they had in years. Sophia had barely been able to stand 20 minutes earlier. She would never leave Noah and Lily willingly. Not after everything she had survived to protect them. The elevator doors opened, and Ethan stepped into chaos. Nurses moved quickly through the hallway, while security officers checked patient rooms and stairwells. One of the incubator alarms sounded softly from inside the suite, where Noah's oxygen levels fluctuated again under stress. Where is she? Ethan demanded immediately. The head guard approached fast. A nurse saw Ms. Bennett walking toward the chapel wing approximately 3 minutes ago. Ethan frowned sharply. Alone? Yes, sir. Ethan looked toward the hallway leading away from the neonatal suites. The private hospital chapel sat at the far end of the pediatric wing, quiet and mostly in use during overnight hours. Without waiting another second, he headed there himself. The corridor grew quieter the farther he walked, until the sounds of monitors and footsteps faded behind him completely. Rain tapped softly against tall glass windows overlooking the sleeping city, while dim wall lights cast long shadows across the empty hallway. Then Ethan saw her. Sophia sat alone inside the small hospital chapel near the front row, wrapped in a thin gray blanket with her hands trembling slightly in her lap. Soft candlelight flickered across the room, while stained glass reflected muted colors against the floor. She looked exhausted beyond words. Fragile in a way he had never allowed himself to notice during their marriage. Ethan exhaled slowly and stepped inside. You scared half the hospital. Sophia gave a weak smile without looking up. I needed 5 minutes where nobody was watching me. Ethan remained standing near the aisle for a moment before finally sitting beside her. Silence settled between them again, but this time it felt different. Less sharp, less defensive. After everything that happened tonight, both of them looked too exhausted to keep pretending distance still existed between them. Sophia stared ahead at the dim altar quietly. I used to come here during the pregnancy whenever I got scared. Ethan looked at her. Scared of what? She laughed softly under her breath. Everything. Her voice cracked slightly. Raising twins alone. Somebody following me. Noah getting sick before he was even born. She swallowed hard before continuing. And honestly, I was scared of you too. Ethan frowned painfully. Me? Sophia finally turned toward him. You walked away from our marriage like shutting the door was the easiest decision in the world. The words hit him harder than any accusation she could have made. Because deep down, part of him knew she believed it. Ethan looked down briefly before answering. It was not easy. You never fought for us. Her eyes filled with tears again. Not once. Ethan sat there silently while the weight of those words settled heavily inside him. The truth was uncomfortable because it was real. During the final year of their marriage, he buried himself inside work, convinced providing financially somehow excused emotional distance. Every disagreement became another meeting avoided, another late night at the office, another silence left unresolved until eventually the marriage collapsed. Beneath everything neither of them said aloud. I thought I was protecting you, Ethan admitted quietly. Sophia looked confused. By divorcing me? Ethan nodded faintly. The company was becoming dangerous. Investors, board pressure, public attacks. He exhaled slowly. I convinced myself cutting personal ties would make you safer. Sophia stared at him in disbelief. You never told me that. Because I was arrogant enough to think I could control everything alone. The silence that followed felt painfully honest. Then suddenly Ethan felt something tiny brush against his chest. He looked down in surprise. One of the neonatal nurses stood quietly beside them, holding Noah carefully against a small support blanket. His oxygen levels stabilized, she whispered gently. We thought skin contact might help him rest. Ethan froze completely. Noah looked impossibly small curled against the blanket, tiny fingers moving weakly beneath the dim chapel light. Sophia's eyes immediately softened at the sight. Slowly, carefully, the nurse helped place Noah against Ethan's chest. The second the infant settled there, something inside Ethan broke open completely. Noah relaxed almost instantly, his tiny heartbeat fluttering steadily against Ethan's chest through the blanket. Ethan lowered his head slightly, overwhelmed by the simple reality of holding his son for the first time. Sophia watched him silently, tears sliding down her cheeks now without resistance. Ethan looked at her across the quiet chapel. "I cannot change what I did before tonight," he said softly. "But I am done letting other people decide what happens to us." Sophia's breathing trembled slightly. "Ethan, you and the twins are my family." His voice stayed calm, but every word carried absolute certainty now. "And nobody touches my family again." Before Sophia could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed inside his jacket pocket. He glanced at the screen. A private message from his head of security. "We found the woman using the stolen hospital badge." Ethan's eyes narrowed instantly as he opened the attachment beneath the text. The security photo loaded slowly across the screen. The moment Sophia saw the woman's face beside him, she stopped breathing for a second. "No," she whispered in shock. Ethan looked at her sharply. "You know her?" Sophia stared at the image, completely pale now. "She worked for me 6 months ago.